A word of warning, this podcast explores graphic and disturbing stories and includes some strong language. It therefore may not be suitable for our young listeners or other folks who may find it disturbing. Hello and welcome to True Crime News, the podcast covering high-profile and under-the-radar cases from across the country every week. I'm your host, Ana Garcia. Everyone in the world of true crime has a story to tell about a case that they've worked or they've lived through. Some are high-profile, some you've never heard of, but they are all fascinating. Today's case centers around a seemingly ordinary contestant of a 1970s dating show, but secretly, he was a serial killer. When Rodney Alcala competed as one of the three bachelors on the dating game, he had already begun his murder spree, and it was his charm, the same thing that won over the attention of the bachelorette on the show, that would help lure his victims. In fact, prior to going on the dating game, Rodney had already murdered at least 2 women in Southern California, also served 34 months in prison for brutally raping and beating an 8-year-old. With us today is Matt Murphy, a former senior deputy district attorney from Orange County in California, a current legal analyst for ABC News, and the author of a new book. It is called The Book of Murder, A Prosecutor's Journey Through Love and Death. And Matt is the one who took on Rodney Alcala's case in 2003 and was ultimately responsible for getting this man behind bars for the rest of his life. Matt, it is such a pleasure to have you. Welcome.
Happy to be here.
There are so many things that I always want to talk to you about, because not only are you so well versed on just about every crime case that there is out there, but your pedigree as far as the cases that you have personally prosecuted are just extraordinary. And congratulations on the success of the book.
Thank you.
So I know we always talk about Rodney's case because it is one of the most unusual. Everyone now, right, knows about the show The Bachelor, and that's all we talk about. But back in the day, even though there's a new version of the dating game was kind of like The Bachelor of its time. So the fact that he got through and became a contestant just makes everything, I guess, more creepy.
Yeah, oh, for sure. And when you talk about Rodney Alcala, I mean, he's a very kind of topical cautionary tale for the modern age that we live in, especially here in California. This guy he kidnapped and raped and almost murdered an 8-year-old girl off the street in Hollywood in 1968. And a very heroic police officer saved her life. And it's one of these situations where it was like, save the little girl on the floor or chase the bad guy out the back door. And he did the right thing. He chose the little girl. She's in a coma for 32 days. And she she should have died. And, the images of that, Anna, of that scene, like the photos alone you can't unsee them. Like more blood than should be able to come out of an 8-year-old girl. Mm-hmm. And he went to New York. He changed his name. He went to NYU film school, studied under Roman Polanski, and he was caught working in an all-girls summer sleepaway camp in Vermont. And they extradited him back to California. Obviously, that is a life case. They sentenced him to life in California State Prison, and he was paroled 34 months later. And it was after his parole from the Tally Shapiro case that Rodney Alcala, depending on the estimate and which detective you talk to, killed probably 100 people. And that's one of those things, like, as California drifts or sprints back towards the ethos of letting these guys out. People need to remember cases like Rodney Alcala, because innocent people suffer when sex offenders like him are released from prison.
Do you think that he was able in many ways to fly under the radar because it was the 70s? We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have doorbell cameras, surveillance in the streets. It was a very, very different time.
Yeah, yes. Certainly it was easier to get away with it back then because we didn't have we don't have modern forensic science back in the 70s. DNA is obviously a huge leap for criminal justice and for the wrongfully accused. Like, we win as a society based on that. But, that guy, whether he's raping women or whether he's raping and almost murdering little girls, that sort of quintessential serial sex offender that is preying upon children That's something that should have been known to the BPT or the Board of Prison Terms back in 1971. And I do not. I mean, I cannot wrap my head around that. I worked on this case for well over 10 years. And it wasn't just me. I worked with a wonderful prosecutor in LA named Gina Satriano. And we combined to, prosecute five murder victims here in Southern California, including a 12-year-old girl. But, part of that is certainly it's easier to catch serial sex offenders now. But they knew enough back then that they never should have released them. I forgive nobody involved in that. I don't want to throw too much shade, but I dealt with the families of those victims for the better part of a decade. And I can tell you, people never recover from that. His victims after being released from prison included a pediatric cancer nurse named Georgia Wickstead in Malibu, a legal secretary named Charlotte Lamb in Santa Monica, a computer programmer named Jill Parento in Burbank, not far from where I think your studio is. I mean, these were and a 12-year-old girl named Robin Samso, and another 18-year-old, wannabe actress who came out from New York. I mean, every one of those women should still be alive today. And it was due to I hate to say it, but it was the gross negligence of the authorities that were supposed to keep him in custody. So yes, forensic science has advanced. No, there's still no excuse for letting a guy like that out.
Do you think that people want to hear these stories about such intricate cases? I, of course, believe that people do. And I think sometimes trying to express how hard all of this was in a time period that people don't have a reference to can sometimes be a little difficult, which is leading. So you know where I'm going. It's about the movie, to be able to show us what maybe younger generations can't conceptualize about what the 70s were like.
Well, the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and, modern times, depending on what case we're talking about, like Gilgo Beach. That's Rex Heuermann. He's presumed innocent, of course. But that one's fascinating because I think he had 19 victims and he ran an architecture firm. So, no, the 70s were pretty wild. But, with some of the legal changes they made in the state of California where you can, they're far more, at least they have been much better about keeping violent serial sex offenders like Alcala in custody. So all those guys are still around. They're just getting caught after maybe their first rape or their second rape, as opposed to working up like so many serial killers do to the really sadistic series of murders. And it's a progression. We've all sort of, heard that the story of the psychopath likes to kill animals when they're kids. Well, that's true. And that often will go to peeping Tom type behavior. And then that might graduate to stealing underwear. And it progresses for a lot of them. I mean, none of them start with their first offense being a rape murder. They work up to it. So we're catching them earlier now. But the 70s were a fascinating time. And what they would do is they would catch guys like Rodney Alcala and they would release them in obscenely short periods of time. And then, for Alcala's case, he violated parole. They got him giving drugs to a 13-year-old girl in Huntington Beach. And they prosecuted her for having marijuana. And then they violated his parole. They released him again. And then he had, one of the things that I really think this movie was well done. Anna Kendrick's movie I saw it for the first time last night. It was powerful. And it was a really stark reminder that we have to be vigilant as a society. And this has nothing to do with politics. This isn't right or left. This is public safety. This is people wanting to protect their families and their kids and their loved ones. And this movie was excellent. I mean,
what's the movie, Matt? Matt, what's the movie? You and I are having a shorthand conversation. Sorry. No, simply because we know each other, which is delightful. But those who are dipping into the conversation may not know what we're referencing. So
Anna Kendrick, it's her directorial debut. It's a movie called Woman of the Hour. It's coming out on Netflix on October 18th. And it's about Rodney Alcala. And there's a few creative, divergences from the actual strict sequence of events. But I thought it was incredibly well done. And the acting in it was superb. She was great, as she always is. And it's vignettes of Rodney Alcala as he's in this murder spree. And yeah, in the middle of that, and it speaks really to the narcissism of sex. A lot of these psychopaths and the sex offenders. In the middle of a murder spree in 1977, the guy auditions for and is chosen for the dating game, and he goes up, and we all sort of do this armchair quarterbacking with sex victims, especially, but thinking, well, I would never get into the guy's car, or I would never let him come into my house, and it's very easy to kind of fall into that trap where we're almost like, it's almost in a weird way judgmental, like, well, how could she have been so naive to let this guy in? And then you see him on the dating game, and he won the dating game. I mean, he was charming. He was quick with a joke. He had a nice smile. He's very handsome for the day. I mean, he had the look of the times, and she picked him. And that's what the movie's about. It's and Anna Kendrick plays a woman named Cheryl Bradshaw, who was actually the bachelorette in the dating game. And that is the actor. I cannot speak highly enough of the job he did, because he really exhibited the charm and how these guys, especially the smart ones, and Alcala had a Mensa level genius IQ. He was a varsity letterman in his college prep high school. He went to Cantwell High. He worked on the yearbook committee. He had a girlfriend. One of the things that I try to dispel a little bit in my book is it's the Buffalo Bill myth. When I rotated into homicide, I thought serial killers were like Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs, where they're these abused outcasts, and they drive a creepy van and live in a creepy house. And the reality for serial killers is far more terrifying, I think, and that is they are the boy next door. They're people that run their own businesses. They have successful marriages. They're in their church. They are highly intelligent, successful people who, many of them, were never abused as kids. And that's a myth. And some of them certainly were. Some of them certainly were exposed to horrific abuse. Most of them were not. So it's almost, a lot of people, it's almost psychologically reassuring, I think, to think that these guys are, we'd be able to spot them. Like I could spot Buffalo Bill if he was in line in front of me at Starbucks, and the truth is, and the fascinating and scary thing about these serial killers is that they blend in, and they're charming and handsome, and a lot of them are smart and successful. And so it's a fascinating thing. It really is. And I thought this movie was excellent. Anna Kendrick was fantastic in it. The acting in it was superb. The photography was great. I was really blown away with it. And the very last scene of that movie absolutely nailed it. And I don't want to give anything away, but it's one of the cases that we dealt with in our trial, and the actors involved in that were absolutely superb. I mean, I had chills watching it last night. I lived that case, dealt with those people as witnesses, and they just did an amazing job.
Does someone play you?
No, I was 12 years old when all that happened. He got convicted in 1979, and then he was the California Supreme Court reversed it. And then he was tried again in 1986. He was convicted again. He was sentenced to death again. And then it went up to the Ninth Circuit, who reversed it for a third time. And then that's how it wound up on my desk in 2002. And it's actually kind of interesting, because whenever a court of appeal reverses a case, any evidence that they found trouble with, you can't admit it. It's called what's known as law of the case. And that's the way it should work. And you want, above all else, you have to be fair to criminal defendants, and you have to maintain the integrity of the case, moving forward, and you have to scrupulously honor the fairness of the process. So what that means, though, as a practical matter, is the families have to go through it again. And he was only caught for the murder of 12-year-old Robin Samso in 1979. So that was the only homicide that they knew of. They suspected him of 5 more in New York, and others around the country, but that was the one that he was convicted of. So when it wound up on my desk, we just had the one, and it had been twice gutted, but once by the California Supreme Court and then once by the Ninth Circuit. And it wound up very, very thin on my desk. And so we started working it up again, because we were not going to let the guy go. And we, had we had an awesome composite put together by Robin's friend, a girl then, 12-year-old named Bridget Wilbert, who gave one of the best composite sketches I've ever seen. And it looks just like him. And we had a couple of other good things going for us, but the case was very, very thin. And no sooner was the ink dry on what's called the return unremitted, from the Ninth Circuit, it's the order to release him or retry him, that we started getting DNA hits out of Los Angeles County. So the CODIS system finally caught up to Rodney Alcala. And so we charged 4 in Los Angeles County and our 1 Orange County case, and we combined. And when they got into his storage locker, he had a storage locker back in 1979, they found hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photographs of young women, young boys, young girls in positions of vulnerability that Rodney Alcala took. He was a graduate of UCLA Film School. He was a real professional photographer. He worked for the Los Angeles Times, and he's charming as hell. And so they got in, and he was able to lure all of these people into these rooms or into the wilderness, somewhere in the forest, wooded areas. He was incredibly prolific. He was unbelievably cruel and sadistic. And they found all these photos, and there's still quite a few that we have not identified who those people were. And some of them wound up leading back to other murder cases. There was a woman named Christine Thornton. Her photo was in Rodney's storage locker, and really amazing police work. When they got up there, the way they got the warrant for the locker, it's like something straight out of a movie. But they got in there and they found this photo of a woman named Christine Thornton on a motorcycle, which was also found in Rodney's storage locker. And it turns out that they were able to connect the mountains in the background. Her sister saw this photo. It was one of the pictures that we released to the public. She's from Texas, and she said, that's my sister. And she had a little congenital defect on her toe. And local prosecutors, based on the mountain range in the background, connected that photo to the skeletalized remains of a woman who was pregnant at the time, which Christine was. And they were able to go through mitochondrial DNA and identify her. So there's a photo of her right before Rodney killed her. And, this was a fascinating case to work on. And then, of course, like all good, psychopaths, he wanted to represent himself. So we dealt with him interpersonally every day for about 6 months during the trial, which was equal parts sort of disturbing and fascinating. I have a whole chapter on that case in my book, and all the background and all the behind the scenes stuff that I think people might enjoy. The Audible is doing actually really well, which I don't understand because I can't stand the sound of my own voice. But I go into great detail about his case and the various failures of the criminal justice system, and culminating in the especially his last 2 homicides. It's just kind of maddening. But I was deeply honored with the job that they did in this movie. I mean, it's really good.
I'm glad to hear that. I can't wait to see it. It's fascinating because we've had a few conversations about this case. I want to talk about when you prosecuted him and he was defending himself. When I look at those photos now, I see a less charming man with that wiry hair, kind of a little hunched over. Honestly, Matt, starting to look like the creepy serial killer.
He was probably, I don't know, early 60s by the time that we were dealing with him. And he'd lost a lot of his looks, but that charm was still there. He was an engaging, he was, again, quick with a joke. Like the guy on the dating game is the guy that we were dealing with. And it is a really interesting thing. If you see the Ted Bundy tapes, there's tapes where they interviewed Ted Bundy, and it's really, it is amazing to me how charming Ted Bundy was too. And you can see that in the tapes. Like there's a thing with Ted Bundy where he's the reporter, it's right before his execution. He said, what's it like to know, question to the effect of what's it like to know you're going to be executed tomorrow? And Bundy laughed and he said, he goes, look, the appellate process with all the motions that we have, he goes, the chances of me getting executed tomorrow are about the same as you getting killed in a car crash on the way home. And he goes, oh, God forbid that should happen. Like he expresses like, oh, I can't believe I said that. How rude of me. Like it's this superficial charm, and he seemed so sincere and apologetic, and they did execute him the next day. But Yeah, it's one of the most fascinating. I keep saying that word fascinating. I'm trying to find a good synonym to it.
Intriguing. He's
Intriguing. How
intriguing.
about that? Mesmerizing. No,
Yeah.
it was an incredible experience to do that case.
So, what can you share with us about, you're trying him, and it's a serious matter. And he is his own attorney, which sometimes can lead to antics, which are, of course, disrespectful not only to the court, but disrespectful to the victims and the surviving family members. So what was that like, trying to balance that?
Well, so yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Anna. We had 5 victims in our case, so everybody had 3 or 4 family members all those years later. I mean, when you lose a loved one to a murder, it's the worst thing I think a human being can ever experience. So decades later, when these families finally got the identity of the person that had so brutally murdered their loved one, they were in court every day. So we have a courtroom that's filled with family members, and you're exactly right. They're called properers. When they represent themselves, they can gum up the gears terribly, and you have to be very cognizant about the jury's time, and you've got to get through it. And if a proper is able to slow things down and create enough of a legal ruckus during the trial, sometimes they refuse to come out of their cells. You can reach a point, depending on how long you've time qualified that jury for, where you run out of jurors and you're back to square one. And so your job as a prosecutor is really twofold. Number one, you have to scrupulously honor the due process rights of any criminal defendant that you're prosecuting, even when they represent themselves. So your first job is to make sure that the process is fair. But not far behind that is you have an obligation to those victims and to the court to do everything you can to make the proceedings move forward and to get through the days. So what we did is he had an excellent lawyer named George Peters, who's very experienced, but a lot of these psychopaths can't resist the opportunity to exert power in a courtroom. They have power of subpoena. They can make people come to court. They can force them to be interviewed. They get discovery in their cells, the police reports and stuff. So they get a lot of special status. And I think it's the control thing. So when he decided to represent himself and the court allowed it, Gina Satriano, my LA counterpart, she's the prosecutor from Los Angeles, who I love, she's like, what do we do? How do we deal with this? Like, this guy's a monster. And what we decided to do was that it was like a good cop, bad cop thing. Like, we were going to have to tell him no a dozen times a day, for the various loony things that he wanted or wanted to do, or the breaks that he wanted to take, or whatever it was. And so we decided that I would basically be very friendly with him and I would interact in a really positive way. And every time we had to tell him no, I would just blame Gina. And it was something that we mapped out, and we had to do it that way. But that was also fascinating for me, because that meant I was on Rodney Alcala duty. I would go in and I'd have to chat him up and I'd have to talk to him as if he was another lawyer. And
didn't you just want to throw up sometimes?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's repulsive. I mean, and just to share an anecdotal moment with you. So we sentenced this guy who was a gang leader. He's a white supremacist gang leader, and he was sentenced to San Quentin, and he was sentenced to death for a gang-related murder he committed that was bad in its own right. But he's one of these. He's like a TV villain. He's got swastikas tattooed all over him, and he's freaking huge. And we get no training on how death row actually works in San Quentin as prosecutors, because it's we just don't. They probably should have, but I had no idea. So one day, right after this guy was sentenced and sent up to San Quentin, I asked Rodney, I'm like, what happens up there? Aren't you worried about guys like that? And I'm surprised, no offense, that they haven't gotten to you yet. I mean, you were a very notorious, convicted, child killer. Like, aren't you worried about that? And Anna, he looked at me, and this is months into the trial where I'm being nice to him every single day. And he was offended. And this is like another really fascinating little vignette into their minds. He looked at me and he goes, Matt, he goes, you know me. He goes, he's on the heavy yard. it turns out they subclassify all the inmates on death row from the least dangerous to the most dangerous. And the least dangerous inmates, they called it the weenie yard. So it's different yards. They named it themselves for the weenies. They're the weenies that don't pose a risk to other staff or each other. The weenie yard. He goes, Matt, I'm on the weenie yard. He's like, I'm not violent. Like, come on, man, you know me. Like, he was, and it's like this guy bashed in women's faces with rocks. The stuff he did was unspeakable. I can't even describe it on your show because it's so horrific. But in his own mind and the way he projects, it's like, hey, you know, I'm not violent. It's one of the most viciously sadistic human beings in the history of the United States. With the way this guy acted, the prolific nature at the time that he was doing it, the way he got away with it, his abject cruelty to his victims. But he was offended at the idea that I would think he'd be on a yard with violent inmates. It's just, it's tough to wrap your head around.
It really is. It really is. I think, I always find the serial killer is the most disturbing of all of the criminals because and I don't even mean this by ordinary crime, but when we look at other people who are otherwise normal and then commit a crime, whether it's a crime of passion, opportunity for financial gain, they're losing their mind because of a custody battle and no one is thinking straight. And again, murder is not the solution, but they are otherwise to some degree, normal or average. But the serial killer is just like a whole other animal.
No, you hit the nail on the head, Anna. And I go into that in my book quite a bit. I go through the taxonomy of murders. And you're absolutely right. The vast majority of murder cases are one-offs. It's a domestic violence situation. It's two neighbors arguing over a fence. It's a bar fight with two guys that would never meet each other ever again. The vast majority of homicide cases in general it's a series of circumstances that come together with the worst result. Serial killers are absolutely different. They do it because they love to do it. They do it because it's fun to them. I did kind of a deep dive when I got into the homicide unit, and I take the reader in the book through my own journey learning about serial killers. And I talk about a guy in the 1880s named Dr. von Krafft-Ebing, who was a German psychiatrist it was probably the first real academic attempt to get a handle on what these people are and what makes them and how to deal with them. And he called them, the term serial killer is an FBI created term. It's not a legal term. And it came from the 70s. Dr. von Krafft-Ebing in the 1800s called them sadistic lust murders. And he put it on a relational spectrum of other paraphilias or sex crimes. And it is the academic history that I think is just, I think it's worth a read. I got into it. I nerd out on true crime, having lived it for so long, and I'm still kind of a junkie. But the history of it is really interesting. There's a book written by an FBI agent named John Douglas.
Yes,
called
amazing.
Mindhunter. It's amazing. It's amazing. And that was part of my journey in trying to figure out, who these, what makes these guys tick, like how they're motivated, because I prosecuted 13 of them while I was in the homicide unit, at least 13 that satisfy the FBI definition, 6 real, what I would consider to be true blue serial killers. But so I wanted to learn, and I take the reader on my own journey, and I have excerpts, and this guy, that Dr. von Krafft-Ebing, he was obviously brilliant. He was a contemporary of Sigmund Freud. It was when some of the great medical works of Germany was having a blossoming in the late 1800s, and it's a thick read because the language is so old, but it is just. It is enthralling. It really is. And it's a very interesting topic, and it's something that these guys haven't gone away. They're still among us. And, I think people educating themselves is good for everyone, especially, here in California, because we seem to forget a lot of the lessons we learned in the 1970s.
Yes, we do have a problem here in California.
Yeah, we do.
I want to talk about Rodney's trophies. A lot of serial killers keep trophies. I think the photos that you described could be part of that. And when they are photographs like that or personal items, they are very incriminating, as in the Grim Sleeper case, which is a case out of the greater Los Angeles area. And this was a man who was a garbage man. He drove the trash truck in LA, and he dumped his victims in trash bins. And he would take Polaroids of his victims. And when they finally narrowed it down to him through familial DNA, and he had gone dormant for a long time. I think serial killers get tired and old. That's part of it sometimes. Anyway, I just remember that your counterparts in the LA County District Attorney's Office, what they were looking for the trophies, and they weren't finding them. They're pulling the house apart and pulling everything apart until finally they're like, that's it, in the garage. Pull everything from the walls. Take the wall down. And there, in like some tucked in little piece, is where they found the photographs.
Well, they got, and remember, genius level IQ, right? So Rodney Alcala knew that the police were onto him. And so there are essentially what we believe to be two batches. One was the photos where he didn't either didn't kill the victims, or maybe he was satisfied that their bodies would never be found. So like the Christine Thornton photo, that was a mistake by him. He was so prolific that I think he left that in there on accident, and then there were the photos from Fisherman's Wharf from a day that another woman went missing in Marin. So the photos of Fisherman's Wharf are there. Her photos were all gone. He was also posing his victims. All of these women were found in positions that looked like their bodies had been posed to be photographed, like the way they're Jill Parenteau and Charlotte Lamb were positioned in the exact same manner, with like in relation to their doorway, as if somebody had taken their photos. And Jill Barkham, same exact thing. Georgia Wickstead, certainly the same thing. So we think there was a second batch that we never did find, and I'm convinced of it. So one day maybe that turns up in a coffee can buried in his mom's backyard, or someplace. I don't know, but I know he took additional photos that we didn't get. But another scary thing is when they got into his house in 1968, after the kidnapping of Tali Shapiro, they found a whole different batch of basically it's described as the same ones that we found. It was young women, young boys in positions of vulnerability, partially nude, some performing sex acts, and those were lost to time after the Tali Shapiro case. Somehow the LAPD misplaced those. They went up in the wrong box. And so we have descriptions of that in some of the reports, but those photos all disappeared. So when they got into his storage locker 10 years later, it was in Seattle, but it was during the search, and it was Huntington Beach that did that search warrant, Huntington Beach Police Department. It was a whole new batch. So, this guy was incredibly prolific. And, that's why Detective Craig Robeson, who's now a Superior Court Judge, Craig Robeson, when you look at the timeline and you do the math and you figure how often he was committing these crimes, and you interpose that over times that he was free, and he was given permission 2 times by his parole officer to drive across country back and forth to New York. We got 5 victims in New York that we know of for sure. 2 suspected in Texas. There's the one in Wyoming that he was charged with, Christine Thornton. There's another suspected case in Vermont, and we did our 5. There's 1 in Marin. There's 2 suspected more in San Diego. So when you do the math, that's where they come up with numbers in excess of 100 victims. And look, one of the things that he would do, they suspect that we had a very famous, turned out to be a duo called the Hillside Strangler. It wound up being 2 different men, same period of time, late 1970s. They suspected Alcala might have been involved in that because, they knew that he was a sex offender, that he'd been paroled. They interviewed him on that, and it's like the one crime that he didn't commit. And but he would dump his victims in chaparral. Oftentimes, like Joe Parento was found on a fire road. That was part of his deal. He dumped Robin Samso in the foothills above Pasadena in Altadena, California. And what happens in Southern California, as you know, there's a term you hear all the time when you work homicides, scavenged. And what happens is the animals come out and they destroy the bodies. They eat the bodies, basically, and they destroy everything of forensic value, or almost everything of forensic value. And that was one of the things that Alcala was doing. So when you're talking about skeletalized and scavenged remains, God only knows how many of those there are across the United States that you're never going to get a DNA hit on that. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, that number sounds about right to me. Having lived that case for a decade, I think it's over 100 victims.
Didn't he collect other items beyond photographs?
Yeah, he sure did. And I'm sorry, I went on I took us on a tangent. They found a little silk pouch in his storage locker. And like you said, and you're exactly right, and it's almost like these guys go to school for it. They like to collect trophies. So he would take photos, but he also would take earrings and items of personal jewelry from these women. They found this silk pouch with, I don't know, probably 33 or 34 different little brooches and necklaces and earrings, lots and lots of earrings. And those were all from victims. The first serial killer case I did was a guy named Victor Miranda Guerrero, also out of Huntington Beach. And he did the exact same thing. He took items of jewelry. He was into rings. For whatever reason, Alcala was into earrings. And he also had a little stash. And so all of the litigation goes on. He's convicted in 1979 and then 1980. Case goes up, and then he's tried again. And there's all this litigation regarding these two little gold ball earrings that Robin Samso's mother identified as belonging to her. Now, the detectives back then and anybody who works these cases immediately recognized this little silk pouch as being his trophy case, right? It's every one of those items of jewelry belonged to some woman that he murdered. And when we got into that, there was all this litigation regarding the two gold ball earrings, as everything else just sat quietly on an evidence shelf. And so when I got the case, we asked for additional testing. And, back in the 70s, without computerized databases, one county away was a really long distance. And Orange County really had no idea about these LA cases and vice versa. And we did testing. They found 0.06 nanograms on a little white gold earring. It was a little rose white gold earring that came back to Charlotte Lamb, who was a legal secretary back when they were still called secretaries, in Santa Monica, that he murdered in the middle of his spree, right around the time he went on the dating game. And she was beloved by her family, like all of his victims were. And it was a very poignant moment. We got that DNA hit, and Robin Samso's mother had been challenged by some excellent appellate lawyers and excellent trial lawyers over the years, where they basically, questioned her credibility regarding identifying these gold ball earrings. And we got that hit, and I got to argue, ladies and gentlemen, who corroborated Robin's mom is Charlotte Lamb, and there's a tiny little piece of her in this courtroom today on that earring. It's right. She's right here with us, and she's telling you that Robin Samso's mother is telling the truth. And that really, it is miraculous modern forensic science, but 0.06 nanograms, and it came back to her. It's, and that also speaks to another thing Anna haven't mentioned yet, is the behind the scenes heroes on these types of cases that never get enough credit. Like the forensic scientists that went to work on that earring and found that DNA. It's like they are the unsung heroes, truly, of so many of these cases. And also they're the unsung heroes of the people that have been wrongfully convicted, that have been freed because DNA evidence has come out. So we owe them, I think, as a society, we owe those people a debt of gratitude that I don't think we'll ever properly repay. I can tell you they're not paid enough in what they do.
All right. No, I understand that. I'm curious, do you have an opinion on whether any of those trophies or pieces of jewelry should all now be tested under current technology, which is even superior to when you were prosecuting?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that it catches up. They were into the co-filer and profiler kits is what they call them now. So they were past what the old DNA of what's called RFLP. Those are the old gel, like the dashes, the dark
Yeah,
lines.
yeah.
So they were swabbed, and I think the
Oh.
swabbing, in order to that's how they test everything now is they swab them. Probably, if they whatever DNA was left, but by the time we did it, I think we did those tests in I want to say 2009. So I mean, gosh, I can't believe I'm saying that's 16 years ago. Anna, is that possible? 15 years ago.
And
But it,
technology has changed so much since then.
Yeah, I know, and it's gotten better. So, look, he died now. Thankfully,
Mm-hmm.
he finally went to where I'm not particularly religious, but in dealing with him, I hope there's a hell, and if there
Mm-hmm.
is, I guarantee he's there. But yeah, I'm a firm believer that bringing justice to the unknown victims, where somebody got away with it, is worth the expense and the time of forensic science to do that. So, yeah, maybe forensic science will catch up to that, and they'll be able to figure out a way. I was really hoping when we released those photos that we would get lucky, because we released photos of the jewelry too, that somebody would identify an item of jewelry. But yeah, I mean, he's the boogeyman, and he is a real cautionary tale. And these guys are still out there, And I thought another myth that I really bought into when I first went into homicide was I thought that serial killers were like a product of sort of failing modern American morality, maybe, or they were somehow a product of, because we hear so many of them in America. But the truth is, I think we have superior law enforcement here. They were better at catching them. And it turns out, especially when you get into, as I did, Dr. Von Kraft-Ebning, that serial killers have been with us for probably as long as there have been people. They go back
That
to,
makes sense.
yeah. I mean, there's ancient Greek myths about the innkeeper that would cut the people. Like, serial killers have existed for as long as there have been humans. There's
Well, I believe that they have a mental defect, that there is something absolutely wrong with them because they are unusual from any other killer. So I do believe that to be true. How you identify that and how you isolate it and then remove it from from the population, that I don't know. I do have a question about when you finally got the conviction. Look, you're very professional, but was there like that moment when the verdict came in? It's like, F you, buddy. That's it. I got you.
Oh gosh. So yes, and in fact, there's a photo of the moment that. So I had to be very friendly and very professional until we got to closing argument, and then I didn't have to do that anymore. And I gave him both barrels. I mean, I just blasted him, and I called him out for the way he treated some of the victims on the stand. I gave it my prosecutorial best. And that's the first time he realized that I wasn't his buddy. And I'm walking past him, and Rodney Alcala stuck his bony serial killer finger out at me, and he said, "You played fast and loose with the facts." And after
oh, I'm sorry. Are your
through,
feelings hurt?
no, and I thought it was. It struck me in the moment, like the absurdity of this guy saying I played fast and loose with the facts, like, and I laughed. And I heard the camera clip because we had tons of media. And the next day, the Orange County Register printed an article saying, basically, prosecutor Matt Murphy laughs at Rodney Alcala after closing argument. And then the LA Times ran a story where the caption was, prosecutor Matt Murphy shares a laugh with convicted serial.
Oh, God, no.
And Anna, yes. I got hate mail from Ireland. I had a guy with the last name of Murphy from Ireland say I was a disgrace to the entire Murphy line because I shared a laugh. It's like, so no, that moment definitely happened. There was another one that was really kind of cool. That I'm sitting next to my detective, my lead, a guy named Pat Ellis from the Huntington Beach Police Department, who we had gone through so much together in that case. And he sat, the way it works is the lead detective sits next to you for the whole trial in Orange County. Orange County uses a kind of a different system. And I loved this man, and I mean, just years and years of this. And we had some dramatic moments in the trial itself, especially regarding the Jill Parento victim out of Burbank, where the police threw the evidence away, and we found a matchbook to the bar that she was at the night she was murdered in Rodney Alcala's glove box in the middle of trial. I mean, like the Huntington Beach Police Department, I cannot praise them enough, but you go through so much. And when they came back, when the jury came back and convicted again on Robin Samso, with everything that her family had gone through, and also with Jill Parentos, she was a 21-year-old computer programmer, and also again lost to time. Somehow all the evidence got put in the wrong box, or was thrown away, or somehow the Burbank Police Department wound up losing almost all the evidence in that case. And in convincing elected DA Steve Cooley, who was the Los Angeles District Attorney back then, to let us do them all together, I agreed to try the Parento case, even though his major crimes division was saying that there wasn't enough evidence. And so, you go through a lot with those families, and you really want to bring it home for them. And there's a picture that it's in my office right now that I cherish. It's the moment the verdict came back, and I did not keep my poker face. The jury might have been excused, but I'm practically kissing Pat Ellis, at counsel table. We were all so happy because we'd gone through so much to bring that case to finality. And I mean, it's a picture of me, and it's what I look like when I'm, truly feeling happy. And there I'm next to my buddy, and with Gina Satriano next to me. It's kind of a highlight of my life, and I'll cherish that photo forever. And it was front page of the Register, which is also kind of cool. Kind of made up for the prosecutor shares a laugh with serial killer shot. So maybe the Murphy clan back in Ireland forgives me a little bit. I don't know.
Gosh, I hope so. You're a good guy, Matt. You're a good human. Not that I think that you did, but when dealing with so much horror, pain, and darkness, I know it affects you personally. Did you either lose a bit of yourself, or were you able to protect a little bit of yourself?
Oh gosh, Anna, that's a good question. The funny thing is about doing that job. So it's a vertical system. In other words, we would go to our own crime scenes, and we'd walk the crime scene ourselves. We'd see the poor victims before they were transported. That's the way it works in Orange County. And the funny thing is that becomes very clinical, believe it or not, like attending the autopsies, going to the crime scenes, the blood and guts of that. I mean, I've seen things that, you can't imagine. But that's not what gets to you. It's when you meet the victims' families, and having seen the actual scene, and then you meet the mom or the dad of the victim or the husband of the victim, and you're in the presence of this apoplectic grief that people go through when a loved one is brutally murdered. It's what kept me up at night, and what I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking about sometimes, is the idea of failing them, as funny as that sounds. And that dream we all have for a while, that you haven't studied for the test in college. You ever have that one?
Mine is that I can't find where I have to go. It's the same dream over and over again.
Same dream, right? And
as a news person,
the classroom, right?
Right. I'm looking for the classroom. I can't find the elevator. I'm late. Where's the studio? Right. It's the same yes. dream.
Okay, so the version of that seeps into. I mean, human psychology is just bizarre, because so many of my colleagues in the homicide unit and we had the same dream. That is, you've got one of these horrible cases. You're standing up in front of a jury and nobody's listening to you. Oh. And that became my nightmare. And I still have it to this day. And I cannot tell you how many times I've woken up with a cold sweat to that one. I've got a family depending on me in the gallery. I've got a murderer sitting at counsel table, and none of the jurors are looking at me. And it's been a recurring dream I've had forever. And now it kind of, that's my stress dream. That's how my stress manifests in my dreams. And I wake up every time to that. I probably have that 2 or 3 times a week. So it's not the gore, it's the weight of the responsibility, the moral responsibility that goes with, bringing those cases home. And, That said, I still miss that job every day. I was in the unit for 17 years, and you do have to sacrifice a little bit of your personal life. I was a horrible romantic partner for a lot of that because you're on call 24/7, and I walked out of a lot of birthday dinners and Thanksgiving dinners because I got called out, and my detectives needed me, and I was going to be there to make sure the warrants were done properly and the constitutional rights of the defense were protected. And I knew whenever my phone rang that I had some family that was simultaneously getting the worst news that they can ever get, and I never felt right about finishing the meal or hanging out until the end of dinner or whatever, or staying until the cake was cut or whatever it was. I would drop everything and go, and that kind of sucks for romantic partners when it's just they're a phone call away from either having to leave if you drove them or having to get a ride home from somebody else. And I never got married. I never had kids. That I really kind of went all in on that job. And I personally I had some colleagues that were wonderful they had the mental bandwidth and the intelligence to be able to compartmentalize being a good dad and being a good husband or being a good wife and mom with being an excellent prosecutor. And some of my colleagues did that remarkably well. I couldn't do it. I was really bad at that. So I was all in on the job. And, I carried 25 or so murder cases at any given time, many of which I write about in the book. And despite all that, it was kind of a calling. I wouldn't trade my experiences and the people I got to work with for anything.
Well, you can you still have the rest of your life, Matt. Not that this is a therapy session, but
I don't know. I crossed the 50 line more than a couple of years ago, and I don't know. I'm having a lot of fun doing this. We'll see. I don't know.
There's a lot of life to live, Matt.
Yes, thank you.
A lot of life to live. I saw that.
Yeah.
I saw that
translates
photo.
into surf trips and diving trips and golf trips
and fly fishing. I was watching your Instagram. I'm like, isn't that nice? Matt's fly fishing.
Yep. We caught some fish too. That was a lot of fun.
Well, wait a minute. Maybe you weren't fly fishing. I thought it was fly fishing. Was it?
It's fly fishing.
Okay, good.
No, it's fly fishing. And I grew up in Southern California. I used to work on a fishing boat as a kid. When it comes to like big reels and ocean fishing, I'm very comfortable with that. The finesse and the strategy of fly fishing is so much fun. And I'm terrible at it. But
I can't. I've tried it. I can't. It's like I can barely stand up in those waders. I always fall down. I don't have the patience.
At least you've done it, though. At least you've done it. I cannot wait to go back and do that again. I had so much fun with that. I did that in Utah recently, as you know. So, I can't wait to go back and do that again.
Matt, it's been such a pleasure to talk with you. I could talk with you all day from
we'll
morning till night.
We'll do it again. Likewise. I love talking about these cases with a pro. Anna, you are a pro. You get it. You've seen all these things. You've done it professionally from the journalistic side. And I enjoy these conversations so much. So use me and abuse me. Call me anytime. I'm up on all the cases of the day, too, for ABC News. So
I would love that.
Yeah,
I would
absolutely.
so love that. I have a million things to ask you about current cases, but I'm not going to bug you. I'm going to let you have your day.
Anytime.
Go live life today, Matt.
Yeah. I got some stuff to do. Book signing tonight in Newport Beach. So
excellent. Congratulations again on the book. Please, what the name of the book is: The Book of Murder, A Prosecutor's Journey Through Love and Death. Some personal stories in there, I understand.
There's a few. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just always a pleasure. And Matt, in addition to the book, if anyone wants to follow you on social media or your website or anything like that, where can people find you?
Matt Murphy Law on Instagram. Right now I answer all the DMs myself.
The serial killers are coming out now looking for you.
Yeah, no, I haven't. They're trying to give them social media in California. Felony prisoners, vote against it, folks. Like, it's the worst idea ever. But
it is ridiculous. It is. I just covered a case.
Offensively bad. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. It's a case out of Georgia where this poor woman was shot 7 times by her estranged husband. She survives. He's in prison right now. And what he's using is through a contraband phone. He is setting up fake social media accounts in order to get messages to her to threaten her.
Yeah, no, they're the same thing's happening in California, and those guys should be in total SEP when they do that. It's like the whole point of prison is they can't re-victimize. That's the whole point. And there's people, some of our fellow Californians, that want to give them social media access. It is madness, but
it is
anyway,
madness. Okay,
yeah,
we digress. We digress.
Later. Yeah, we digress.
That's another pod.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Anna, and thank you for the kind words about the book.
Absolutely.
Can't wait to come back.
Absolutely. This is True Crime News, the podcast. It's been a very special edition. I'm your host, Ana Garcia. We'll see you next time, everyone.